Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Civalgo podcast, the podcast that gives back to the construction industry in terms of advice, knowledge, and best practices. Today, we're going to talk with Guillaume Laferriere, a senior estimator, and we're going to talk about the challenges and the evolution of estimators in 2025. I want to congratulate you, Guillaume, for being with us. This is a great opportunity. How are you doing today?
Good, and thanks for having me.
Amazing. We're going to have a great time, and I did want to remind our audience about the mission of the Civalgo podcast, which is giving back to the industry. So if you could help us in our mission and share the podcast with your network, it will help us pass the word. So to start, Guillaume, can you talk to us a little bit about your background, your journey, and your expertise?
Sure. So I'm from Northern Ontario originally. I moved to Ottawa to go to college at Algonquin College. I took a civil engineering technician program, did my 3 years there, and shortly thereafter I found a job with a company here in the Ottawa region. It was a role as a project coordinator initially, with kind of a little bit of estimating involved in there. And I quickly realized that I liked the estimating part of construction, not so much the field aspect of it. So I kind of quickly, I guess, made a decision that I was going to try to concentrate my career advancement in the estimating side of things. So anyways, I started with a paving company, so that kind of gave me the high-level civil scope of work, I guess, if you will, from managing subcontractors for concrete works and stuff like that, sewer works, and then doing paving jobs as big as a $50 million job to basically finish paving the Highway 50 in Gatineau. So anyways, good exposure there from a paving perspective. Then after that, I migrated to another company and I went in the sewer and watermain world. Which was a completely different scope there too, different variables, a lot more technical than the paving world, I would say. And then with that same company, there was a need on the heavy civil side, so that was our bridge division, and paving there again. And given my past experience before in the paving world and industry and whatnot, then I went and helped out that division, and there I got exposure to bridges, structures, that kind of stuff. And then after, I'd say 7 or 8 years with that company, I'm now with a specialized subcontractor. So I kind of have a pretty good overview of all the different aspects of estimating, from small companies to big one. Even with the company I worked with for a time, we did a P3 project, private partnership with the public and everything. So it was a joint venture. We put a bid together for the light rail phase 2 here in Ottawa, which was a $3.1 billion bid.
Massive project.
Exactly. So, which was a nice learning curve from the estimating perspective to understand that, because typically I was used to, bidding a new job every couple weeks or every month. You learn your project, you bid it. Obviously, if you're successful, great. If you're not, unfortunately, it's move on to the next thing. Where the difference on that light rail project, we were on the same project for 1.5 years, bidding the same job, but then different levels of, accuracy. Like you basically start with a high level budget, give you an idea of what the job is worth, and then you slowly try to work on that and basically refine your price, because obviously we all know it's lowest price wins. So anyways, all that to say that I have a pretty well-versed estimating career. So I've dabbled in a lot of different scopes of works or work types, if you will, and also worked for general contractors, joint ventures, and small subcontractors.
So your experience and journey are really fascinating, and you've touched a lot of different things, right? So you can definitely pull all of the great elements together. I'm curious about your last 15 years. So you saw the spectrum evolve. So what would you say actually changed from when you started to the more modern estimates?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because when I first started my first company, they were already well established, a bigger company, and they already had an estimating software, very well groomed database and everything. And it's actually when I went to my second job and started in the sewer and water, the company I started working for were actually using an Excel spreadsheet to put their tenders together. So I guess that's kind of the big evolution, I would say, in estimating. There were still companies using Excel spreadsheets. Now there's a plethora of estimating softwares you can choose from out there. I guess the other bigger advancement, I wouldn't necessarily say comes from the costing side of things. I think it's more from the digitizing of drawings and to help with takeoffs and stuff like that. Because back in those days, like, half the drawings you were getting, you were probably going to pick up at the MTQ or whatever, right? So it was like a drawing package, and it was actual physical drawings. So unless you were going to scan those and then put them in a computer to have them digitized, you were literally working
measuring.
exactly, right? With a ruler or whatever the case may be. So I think like the biggest advancement on that side is more how computers and being able to digitize drawings to basically help with the takeoff of doing a site excavation for a building or whatever the case may be, instead of having to, we actually had a digitizing table. So you'd like tape your drawing to it, and then with a pen, you'd basically click every elevation mark and then give it a profile, and then you put your projected drawing on the board after, but then you have to make sure that it was like lined up properly, and then you go and with a pen digitize basically every elevation of what was projected, and then from there in software manipulation you were able to do a takeoff on cut and fill, for example, where now like a lot of companies or consultants have CAD drawings already. They won't always release that information at tender time. Some of them do, some of them don't. But then if you get CAD drawings at tender time, like you can do a cut and fill takeoff with the right software in like a half hour, compared to like sometimes that'd be 3 days on a big takeoff with the digitizer, right? And then the other thing there too, I think AI is playing a huge role, obviously, in every market now, and it's the same in estimating. And again, I think it's more for document processing and just kind of helping us read through a spec and kind of point out the things that you need to pay more attention to. And same with drawings, basically being able to digitize the drawings and understand that these are contour lines, and there's a value to that, and then you can put that in the software and basically extract the data from the drawings. So I think there's a big advancement on that side. When it comes to actually pricing jobs and everything, like obviously computers existed back then, so Excel sheets kind of did the trick. And I mean, for lack of a better comparison, like most of the estimating software are just glorified Excel sheets with a user interface and a database and everything, but it's basically just calculating dollars and durations, right?
That's super interesting. So why would you say that heavy civil estimates are more complex than different industries?
A quick example that I like to use for that is, for example, like an electrical contractor like going into a building to install a plug, for example, right? Like, it doesn't matter where the building is, like that plug's going to take the same amount of time to install, basically. There's no variables to where the plug is going to go. Yeah, sure, maybe there's a height difference or whatever, but technically, you can guarantee that installing the plug is not going to take any longer doing it here in Ottawa than doing it in Montreal, Toronto, or even Dubai, for that, for lack of a better example. Where in the civil world, there's so many variables and constraints. So for example, installing a 300 mil water main, well, water main's a bad example, but storm sewer, for example. Well, that storm sewer could be 15 meters in the ground. It could be 2 meters in the ground with insulation on top of it. It could be in bedrock. It could be in clays that you need to support with a shoring system. So you can't just go and assume that because you price the water or a storm sewer of 300 mil in Ottawa and you have a job in Toronto or Montreal that has a 300 mil sewer, that it's going to be the same unit price.
It's never the same.
Exactly. So there's a lot more digging, a lot more variables that go into it. Geotech reports, like whatever the case may be. Removals of the existing stuff like that. So it's just, I think it's the amount of variables that like start going into that, and it's also the time of year you're going to be performing the work, right? Like installing an electrical system, you're typically inside of a building, temperature's controlled, where in the civil world you're dealing with the elements, you're dealing with the guys being cold that day. So that's why, like, winter production, you usually get a loss of production on your work, stuff like that. Where I feel like in other fields, it's not as applicable, or like, again, not as many variables.
Yeah, so it's predictability.
Exactly.
Really. Yeah? Okay, interesting. So you're evolving as an estimator. You're 15 years in, I think?
15 years, yeah.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
So during your career, how did you actually like stay connected, right? Did you go back to the field sometimes? And how do you like improve your capacity and your experience? What allows you to stay connected as a heavy civil estimator?
So my big thing there, and I've trained quite a few estimators throughout my career, colleagues or estimators that work for me directly. And what I like to tell an estimator when they first start is you're not inventing the productions, you're not coming up with how it's going to get built. What we do is we grab the information and we come up with how much it's going to cost to do it. So yeah, it's important to always stay connected. Typically, I mean, the company I work for now, we're spread across Canada. It's very specialized work, so I don't always have the opportunity to go see a machine working in Vancouver per se. But obviously, if they're in the area, then we make a point of getting our guys out there so they can see what's actually happening, talking to the operators, getting a feel for, hey, how long did it take you to set up this time, kind of thing. But then there's also, when you're putting a bid together, and it goes back to what I was saying initially, like I'll always bring a super or someone in to basically tell me, okay, well, like, how do you see this job? Like, what do you think we can achieve on this one? Even to the point where I might bring in 3 different supers. Because I know I have
3 opinions, right?
Exactly. But, and I also, because everyone's human, right? So you have that super that's like, oh yeah, I can get everything done. It's going to be, where he's kind of thinking best case scenario all the time. Well, we know in construction that never happens. Or you also have that other super that's very conservative because he doesn't want to tell you that he's going to be able to do something in a day, and then it takes him a day and a half on the job, and then he thinks, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job because I told him I could do it in a day, and it's going to take me a day and a half. So you kind of have to gather the information and then make your best decision out of the information that you get there. So I guess that's kind of how you stay connected. And again, going back to, as an estimator, I'm not the one deciding what the production should be on putting pipe in the ground or whatever. I'm talking to the guys that do that every day.
So what I'm hearing is that communication has a lot to do with actually building an estimate, because you're capturing information from left and right, assembling it together to get the best price possible.
Absolutely, and that goes from everything from our productions for our equipment, but then also getting pricing from suppliers and whatever, right? Like you can always deal with the one supplier assuming that he's giving you the best price, but then if you reach out to 5 of them, then maybe you get a quote that you're like, oh my God, you know, that'll give me the advantage on this job that I need to win this. So it's really internally, but it's also with all the aspects of the work and getting the cost in. So it's literally just gathering the information and putting it all together and then being able to review with your team and saying, here's how I came up with that number and here's my logic on that kind of thing.
Amazing. So I heard also the word, I'm not coming up with productivity and the performances, right? We'll touch base on that a little bit later. I wanted to shift gears and kind of understand about, you know, I mean, in your career, you've implemented so many different systems. We were talking the other day, and pretty much all of them, right? So I want you to share with our audience like the best practices of like choosing the right estimation system and understanding the pros and cons and actually what you learned about those implementations during your career.
Sure. So first things first, most companies will be tied to an estimating software without really knowing it. And the reason for that is based on the software that you're using to manage your costs. So basically, like a lot of if a lot of these estimating software are tied to a project management software. So like Maestro, for example, or JD Powers or Innate or whatever, right? So depending on what you're using, certain estimating software might not be able to talk to your project management software or whatever you're using to basically for costing. So that's one of the aspects there. The other thing to keep in mind too is how much into the weeds you want to get, right? Like for some companies, it's valuable to know the price of that bolt and how many bolts I'm going to have on a job, where other companies are fine with grabbing a lump sum from the supplier, plugging that in their price, spreading it over the items and calling it a day. So you got to get a good understanding of how much information you're going to have and how complex your databases are going to be, from materials, equipment, labor. So for example, I mentioned the company I work for now, we're Canada-wide. So we needed an estimating software that I was able to have my guys out west, my guys out east, be able to select the labor unions that they're working with or the equipment rates in that area. So we have an estimating software where it's basically you just go pick the labor rate for if you're working in Ottawa or if you're working in Northern Ontario or Eastern Canada. So it had that flexibility. So again, I think most estimating softwares all ultimately will be able to give you the cost of something. It's more just the additional tools and bells and whistles that companies are willing to, because typically would cost more money to go for it, and to see if there's even any value in your company in doing so. And I think a big misunderstanding too, because you'll typically when a company is deciding to go with an estimating software, they'll bring in, the bid to win representatives or whatever to come in and say, like, sell me your product kind of thing. So I think there's a big misunderstanding, because then they'll sit there, they have a full database of everything, and they're like, yeah, see, like you can go back and see your productions on the 50 other jobs you've done before, and then the estimating software will tell you what your average production should be for this scope of work kind of thing. But what happens is you're looking at that and you're like, oh yeah, great, like you're telling me it's going to go back through all my old bids and give me the production. Well, not quite. It's a data entry process where like all these other jobs that you have to be coded a certain way so that the software is able to go gather that data and then spit out that answer for you. So I think there's a big misunderstanding when these people come and give you a demo saying, here's what our software can do. Then a lot of companies don't realize that you need all the people in the background getting that data into the software so then you can properly use it. But that's like an ongoing thing forever. Like, you finish a project, well, you need to grab that data from the project and basically do your comparison versus your bid, and that needs to get entered by someone, right? Which typically, like in the construction industry, we're all about, okay, let's win a job, let's get it executed, and once the job's done, it's like, okay, we made money, all right, we're good, on to the next one kind of thing, right? So it's unless there's either a lesson to be learned where you want to go back in your costs and see, okay, what went wrong on this job, there's very rarely have I seen companies do really good, like a follow-up on every project and grabbing that data and then putting it into a database where it's useful for later. So I guess ultimately those are like kind of the 2-3 things that I would say high level. You need to get a good understanding of what your company wants to do and basically how much into detail you want to get to. Because sure, like there's value in getting into details, but I've had the estimators sometimes come to me and be like, oh, like I'm going to work this whole other scope just to see, like, in the end how it's going to come out, and then they spend all this time to realize that, hey, like, it was a $5,000 difference, right? So like that's not where the money is at on a $50 million job kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of that stuff, like where the size of the company, how many users are going to be using it, and actually that's another great one that I should bring up from learning from mistakes. So one of the companies I worked at were basically revamping their whole system from cost tracking to the estimating software. And then the cost tracking, it's a big player out there, SAP. So SAP representatives came to the office and basically sold to the leadership that this estimating software and SAP were flawless. They talked together, no problem. So if you built an estimate, getting your cost into SAP to then track your job was flawless. Like a click of a button and it would get done. So the company just went ahead and pulled the trigger on the software associated with SAP without even talking to any of the estimators. So we showed up at a meeting one day and they're like, okay guys, here's what we're doing. You guys have heard that we're implementing SAP. Well, unfortunately, that's going to affect our estimating software that we're using currently. And this is the tool that you guys are going to be using now. I've never seen a bigger struggle on trying to implement an estimating software, because the 12 guys that were using that software every day and we're going to be like working with it never got asked their opinion on which software to use, or is this actually better than what you're using right now? And the other big caveat in all this is that there was a little bit of a fib there where the software did not talk to SAP like they had promised, where we were months and months struggling on trying to get the information from the estimating software to the SAP software, to the point where a lot of us were like, well, we probably could have figured it out with another estimating software, because in the end, it's just data coming out and data coming in. You just got to format it so that both softwares can kind of talk to each other, if you will. So that's another big one there, is make sure that the guys that are going to be using that software every day are involved in the process and get a say in what's going to happen. Because there was a lot of pushback there, even to the point where estimators left because they were like, I have zero interest in relearning a software or using something that's making my job more complicated now, you know? So yeah, that's a big aspect that, you know, you never really think that you would get to that point, but yeah, we were all taken by surprise, I guess, once that was pushed onto us.
Very interesting that in these modern times where like teams and individuals create a culture in a business that people wouldn't get, you know, involved in the choice of a system. But it's hard for me to understand, but I mean.
And again, there, I think it was just a misunderstanding of how both softwares talk to each other. So they just made the assumption, well, this is a software that works with this, so that's what we have to go with, kind of thing.
Yeah, and we've seen that the integrations are critical, right? If you're talking about a field data capture app and bringing back productivity for estimates, creating a database, it's
closing the loop.
Critical, right?
Exactly.
So
yeah.
I wanted to touch base on Excel. I meet a lot of contractors every day, and a lot of people say they rather work on Excel than dedicated estimation software. What are your thoughts and advice on something like that?
For me, it's about the size of your company and how many bids you're going to pump out. So sure, like you know, a $10 million a year kind of small mom and pop outfit, you know, an Excel sheet will probably do more than what you actually really need. So yeah, like it could be more than sufficient if you're bidding, you know, those 10 projects where like, you know, the jobs you're going after, you're not out there bidding everything under the sun, which is kind of where these big companies get at, right? Like they get so big that it's like, well, to keep this monster eating, we need to bid everything that's under the sun. Well, when you get to that point and you're doing $200 million a year, well, you need some efficiencies where you can just literally like copy paste some stuff or have templates where, sure, you could probably get that done in Excel, but it also gets to a point, to go back to the company that I was referring to earlier, where I think it was further in my career where I went back to an Excel sheet and I was like, whoa. But then the problem with that, they were probably like a $60 million a year sewer company. They had 20 or call it 12 crews out there. So to keep that machine going, like it was a lot of work. So it got to a point where our database was getting so big, our crew variations were getting so like, we had just so many different types that it got to the point where our Excel spreadsheet wasn't keeping up anymore. Like it kept crashing on us.
You broke it.
Because the macro, well, just because the database was just too big, right? And ultimately that's what it is Excel is just running through the data, your tables or whatever. So it would just get to a point where the software would start, or the Excel sheet would start doing a loop, and then you'd crash, and then it'd be like, oh my God, I hope that I saved it like recently enough that I have like most of the stuff that I put in there, right? So that's when they kind of got to the point where they realized, okay, we need something else.
So, you know, you would tell a smaller contractor, it's fine to work on Excel. You have flexibility, but at one point you need to shift to a more dedicated systems. What are the features that you really appreciate from an estimation system? Let's call it bid to win, HCSS, no matter which system out there. Which are the features that you appreciate that you can get in decent estimation systems that you don't find or have in Excel?
So for example, like, and again, like they all pretty much work the same. So you'll have your labor component where you have your foremen, your laborers, welders, operators, whatever, like multiple types. And then you can actually build a crew where you grab the guys that you need, because every crew's formatted a little bit differently, and then you pull your equipment from another one. If you have materials that go into it, so then you build kind of a task template, I guess, if you will, so that when you are pricing a 300 mil water main, you have the crew, your typical crew, sure, it'll change where you can add a guy because it's at a certain depth or whatever the case may be. And then you have your material component, from your granulars to your pipe to actually the displacement, so the disposal of the soil that you're going to have to get rid of off-site. And then you have your supervision. So basically, your pay item for your 300 mil water main, you grab that from your database, it already has everything in there. All you're changing is your production. And like I said, if you need to add a truck or whatever the case may be, change a guy out because whatever reason you want to do it, you want to be aggressive on this one, you're going to remove a guy from the sewer crew, whatever the reason may be. So it just gives you that flexibility where in Excel, sure, you could say like, okay, my crew is worth this much an hour based on the calculations that you've made, but you don't have the flexibility of like going in the software and saying, okay, but what if I add a guy to that crew, or like, and tying all your materials and all your disposals and all that into kind of one stop shop where it's like you pull it into your item. All you got to do is change your production, and then you're on to pricing your next item kind of thing. Where in an Excel spreadsheet, you'd have to put a value for your crew, a value for your equipment, a value for all that stuff, unless you build a database, which at that point, then you might as well just start using an estimating software.
It feels like a lot of work to maintain with a lot of risks of errors.
And that's the thing too, when it comes to updating your databases with an estimating software, like, you know, that's something we do usually in the winter months or like in the spring when it's a little bit slower. So then we'll go and we update all our labor rates for the next year. And then same with materials, as we get quotes from suppliers or whatever, we update our database. So then when the other estimators, you know, pricing a tiny little job where he's like, well, I'm not going to go to market for pricing on this. Like it's a whatever. We have something that we can go back on kind of thing. So I guess that would be the advantages of estimating software. It just kind of streamlines the process, and it basically makes it like you're not limited to the size or, you know, the quantity of jobs that you're going to bid. Like they're made to basically, like, for example, the company I'm at now, like with all our divisions or whatever, like we price well over 1,000 bids a year.
Impressive.
Yeah, like just our trenchless division, I think we're already at like 350.
So it needs to be robust, right?
Exactly. Like it needs to be like plug and play is the term that I like to use, where it's literally just click and drag, have all your stuff, where you're not sitting there and having to reinvent the wheel or start from scratch every time kind of thing.
So what kind of blows my mind is the fact that you need to do a post-mortem. Like, I thought these heavy-duty estimation systems actually would propose something that would actually compare the real-time field with the budgets and the estimation, because who has time to go back after a job and sit around a table and kind of say like, hey, let's look at what went right and what went wrong, right? So we can get back into that.
And yeah, don't get me wrong, there are softwares that do that, but again, like I was saying earlier, then you get tied to another software for your field management, and then a lot of companies like have a hard time justifying, because like typically you already have, like I said, a cost tracking software where your accounting's using for payroll and all that stuff. So unless your field tracking software is going to encapsulate all that, then it's like now you're talking about 3 different softwares that you need to use to kind of do what you got to do on a day-to-day basis. And again, if they're not all from the same suite, like, you know, the same company that makes all 3 softwares, then it's like, okay, well, how do we get them to talk to each other without having to do like raw data entry and having 10 people that are just plugging data all day, right? So there are softwares that can do that, but then it's the fine line between, okay, well, what's the value that we're getting out of it, and is it really worth having 3 different softwares out there, you know? Absolutely.
And those integrations, in some certain scenarios, you're better having, you know, the best of breed. In some other cases, you want to have one thing that does it all. I completely get it. I want to kind of shift here to one of the implementations you've done.
Yep.
We were talking, and you participated in these big projects where you were changing the processes. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, the successes that you've had and kind of why that happened, and with the perspective of really giving advice to the audience that is maybe shifting away from Excel?
Right? Yeah. So, well, again, same company where I started there, and I was a little flabbergasted at the fact that they're still using an Excel spreadsheet. But then they had already understood the need for bringing an estimating software in. So I was mandated, basically, I was given, I think it was 4 months to build a database in an estimating software and basically get the format of that company was project manager estimators. So project managers would bid their own jobs and then go manage them after. Where other companies, you just have estimators that bid work and then project managers go manage it after. The style was important there because basically every person in that building was an estimator. And not only that, they had been using their Excel sheet for years before I got there. So everyone was kind of comfortable with the system. So what I did in implementing TPL at the time was a software that they decided to go with. I had obviously I got a presentation on TPL and the features that it had or whatever. I kind of took it and I guess used the software, but kind of made it do things that like the guys at TPL were like, well, that's not really the function behind that. But I'm like, well, for me to be able to have these guys use the software, like this is how I need to set it up kind of thing. So what I tried to do there is basically set it up as close as possible to basically how they were using their Excel sheet, so that the PMs, like it wasn't like basically relearning the wheel or like relearning a whole new way of doing things. So I guess that was one of the aspects. And then the other thing there was like, again, how much into the weeds do you want to get? Like how specific do we want to get on our tenders? Because again, to go back to that Excel sheet, like they literally had every bolts and everything like that. So then we kind of decided like, okay, well, with this new estimating software, like we're going to keep it like a little bit higher level, like not go down to basically each bolt and restrainer, but like hydrant assembly kind of thing, where you're going to carry all the components that you would need to install a hydrant. So in that style there, like it was basically coming up with a game plan before even starting to build databases or starting to put labor rates in there of how the whole thing was going to work and how we were basically going to put tenders together. And it was, it was kind of a little bit of trial and error because it was the first time I ever did something like that. So, I'd start putting materials in. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that looks good. But then getting to another part of the software, I was trying to put assemblies. I'm like, oh, no, the way that like I put the materials, either like the way I name them, because obviously it's a database, so you're just scrolling through a list of materials. You obviously want to put classifiers or like quick search things that you can kind of isolate certain materials or crews or whatever the case may be. So it was a lot of like trial and error of being like, okay, well, if we name it like that, then at least all the pipes come in the right diameters. You're starting at 100 mil and working your way to 1200, not the other way around kind of thing, or your 1200s and your 1050s are all kind of mixed together just because of the way you're coding or naming an item. And the other big thing too, when implementing an estimating software, which goes back to how deep do you want to get into, also on how much do you want to track in the field. Because everything you're doing in an estimating software, if it's something that you're going to track in the field, you got to put a code to it. Because basically that code is just going to be universal for installing, I'm going back to 300 mil water main, but like you would have a code specific to that. And that's how the software recognizes everywhere that you have a 300 mil water main in your estimating software, is because that work type has that specific code, and that's how it brings back your productions. That's how, like, if you were to do your post-mortem, like you said, that's how it tracks, like, okay, well, yeah, we bid it at that production, but this is actually what we hit. So we want the software to know that we don't want to use the 60 meters a day we want the 50 actual that we did, which is data entry, but it's all based on code. So again, if you're planning on doing that in the future where you're going to track your jobs based on your estimating software, well, you might as well go ahead and start coding all that stuff and making sure that that's all kind of working right off the bat. And like my first tip for anyone that is gonna do that is like test. Like build a crew, build an item, and see how the software works. And then once you slowly get your database going, then you basically do a shadow bid. So you'll keep using the software that you've been using for 10 years to put your bids because you're comfortable with that. You know how your cost is or how your operations will come back versus what you're pricing there. And then you compare with your estimating software that you're doing and be like, oh yeah, okay, we bid a $2 million job and we're like,
equal.
We're $1,500 off. Like that's good, we're there. Where I did some exercise where like, oh yeah, okay, if we do this, it should all work. And it's like, no, it's not plugging the right thing. The materials are off. So then it's like, okay, we got to go back and rethink this. So it's I guess my biggest thing would be don't rush it. Like take the time to make sure that it's properly built, it's doing what you want it to do, because then to try to get people to use a software that's half working or like, oh, we'll fix that later, like it's going to be hard to get people on board and make them realize that, yeah, it is a useful tool and it's making my job easier if it's not properly set up.
So what I'm hearing is that, first of all, smart nomenclature, right?
Absolutely.
Start with that, and if you're implementing an estimation software, before populating everything, do a little bit of each and do a cycle.
Exactly.
Right? To then do a shadow bid. Makes sense. When you implemented TPL, let's say, there were other people in the company, right?
Yes.
First of all, did you migrate your database or did you start fresh? And what was the impact on resistance to change? Because that's a big one, right?
Absolutely. So at first I tried just importing the databases, but then again, just because of the Excel sheet and how they had stuff named in there and just how Excel basically puts stuff in alphabetical order or whatever, it didn't necessarily work like that in TPL. Again, like it's been a few years now, either it was going off of a certain code or whatever on how the order would be in your list of materials. So it just like didn't work when I imported it. Like it wasn't.
You were better off starting off
So
fresh.
I just took it all out and I'm like, we're just going to start fresh, which is where we also made the decision to not go that deep into the weeds.
Which is a good thing, right?
Exactly. In the end, I think it was. Like again, when we were doing our shadow bids, like we realized like it wasn't in the materials that like we were really, the deltas were, you know.
It's always in the labor, honestly. It's never, it's in the productivity, right?
Yeah.
It's not like we're really smart at measuring and counting materials.
But then again, right, say that to an estimator without actually doing the exercise, he's never going to trust you. He'll be like, no, I want to do the exercise and I want to see apples to apples, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that was it there. So basically we started the databases fresh because the Excel sheet didn't really function. Now, had I had an estimating software in place already to just replace it with a new estimating software, maybe my answer would be different. And then when it came to the pushback, honestly, because of the way I set it up and like I said, actually like kind of made TPL do things that it wasn't intended to do these things. Out of the, I think 6 PMEs that I had 5 of them after the 2 months, like fully committed. They were on and they had completely moved on from the Excel spreadsheet. So I had one guy that just wouldn't make the leap. And I'm pretty sure at that point it was just one of those where, you know, he was already far enough in his career. They were just like, okay, well, we're not, you know, like this guy's going to retire in 2-3 years. So we understand he doesn't want to like, you know, learn a whole new software or way of doing things. So they just kind of, well, not remove them, but they just kind of took him away from estimating a little bit more and just had him more managing projects. Because then that's also at the point in my career, going back to what I was saying earlier, when you become a certain size, you just want to bid everything under the sun because you just need all the work that you can get. So we kind of got to that point where I convinced my manager at the time. I was like, hey, I think like I don't want to be a PME. I don't want to deal with the field stuff anymore. I just want to be a sole estimator. And I'm like, I think the way our company is right now, like we need to bid everything. So I think it kind of made sense. And then he agreed. So then I just kind of, that's the point in my career where like I completely removed myself from, you know, project coordination or project management and doing billing and all that stuff. I was just a sole estimator. If I won a job, then I would transfer it over to a PM and then he would grab it and then go run it in the field kind of thing.
Makes sense. And like, if we move back to the feedback loop we were talking about before, what do you think is the most effective way to actually capture data and experience to actually populate productivity that is the critical aspect in heavy civil bids, right?
Yeah.
Everything revolves around productivity. And what do you think is the best way to kind of capture the real insights and master that experience to bring it to your estimates?
So the best way would be to have a full suite of software that literally your bidding software talks to your accounting software that talks to your project management software, which, like I said, those programs exist. I've never had the chance to work with one where, like, you know, a company that I was at had an estimating software that was basic, the whole suite, I guess, if you will. So it was always kind of okay, well, like again, data entering for people, or like you said, a post-mortem. They're tough to do, but what I like about post-mortem is it's a conversation. It's not just like numbers on a sheet, right? Because no one's going to go back and look at numbers and be like, oh, whatever, I carried 5 days, they did it in 4. Like, that's just boring. Where when you have a post-mortem, you bring the guys, the superintendent in the field, and he'll explain to you why it took them longer or why they were able to do it so much quicker. So and companies hate doing that because that guy's not being productive in the field. You're not putting a bid together. But the amount of value that you'll get in return from that is priceless, in my opinion, for that exact reason. Because then you learn from your mistakes. You learn from the good things that you've done also. And again, it's not just numbers on a sheet where, yeah, we'll get to it when we get to it. It's a meeting. People are talking. And in the end, you can walk out of there and be like, 5 years later, be like, I remember that job. So-and-so came in and said, they were able to do this for whatever reason, where if it's just a number on a page, like 2 weeks from now, you've moved on kind of thing, you're like, yeah, the job went well. Sure, a couple items lost money, but do we really know why? No, we didn't get into the details of it. Where if you have a post-mortem and you go through your job and talk to the PM, talk to the supers, talk to the project coordinators, the suppliers, then you get a real good feel for what went right, what went wrong. And most times it'll give you an advantage on the next one that you're going to bid, because you'll have more confidence in being able to cut a corner here or remove that money. We're going to be able to get away without doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, you're going to learn way faster by actually understanding where you went wrong and where you actually performed amazingly. So having that post-mortem is critical, in my opinion. It's just that you have to make it easy, right?
Exactly.
You can't have it like cumbersome with so much data entry. I mean, there are ways out there. That's one of the things we do at Civalgo, and there's other systems that do it great as well. It's all about communication and including the human being in there, right?
Exactly.
Because what's going to actually be lucrative? Having your foreman on the job for 4 hours, or actually understanding how to improve the next 10, 20, $50 million job, right?
Absolutely.
When you look at it in that perspective, it makes absolute sense, right?
And it's for both parties too, right? Like I've had a lot of foremen that, like, once you sit down with them and explain to them how you come up with a bid, they're like, oh, I just figured you had a big database and you were like, oh, 300 mil water main, there's the price for it. And it's like, no, like I go through inverts, I go through amount of services, and like I put up, it gives them an appreciation for what you do too. So then they understand that, hey, like if we are losing money on an item, like I better go tell someone, because that guy in estimating is just going to keep doing the same thing until someone tells them otherwise, right? So it's not just valuable for the estimators, it's also valuable for the guys in the field to understand this is how we cost stuff, this is what's included. So then when they do get in the field and it's like, oh, well, I'm looking at my cost detail, like we don't have any money to do that. Then it's like, okay, well, we can wave a flag here. Let's have a conversation. Is this something we should be charging the client for because it's something they've missed, or is it something that the estimator missed where, you know, it falls on us? But at least there's a conversation being had about that, where if the foreman has no idea what your cost is or what you carried to build that water main, he's not going to worry about it. He's going to put the water main in the ground, and then 2 months from now, when you lost $100,000 on that item, then everyone's like, well, what the hell happened, you know? Where if he has an understanding of what's actually going in right off the bat at estimating, it gives them an appreciation and also lets them know how they can manage their costs and make sure that they're not losing money on the job.
So we just expressed how important it is to communicate and gather experience from our team. And moving forward, how do you think AI will impact the future of estimators?
So I think that's where AI is going to have a great role, and you're already starting to see it, for example, with BidBo, right? Like importing subquotes. Every estimating software can do that. But the problem with every other estimating software is that you have to make sure that your columns all match, or you actually have to send that Excel sheet to your sub. He has to fill it in, and if there's if there's a value in there that doesn't work, that, you know, your software doesn't recognize, then you get an error, and it's like it doesn't do anything. Where like with BidBo, with the AI component of that, which I thought was great, we'll just be like, okay, well, like every quote's going to have a line item or item number, description, unit price, total price, quantity kind of thing, right? So those are all things that a quote should have, where AI was able to identify those things. So it didn't matter how the quote came in from the sub, AI was able to, you know, scan through and basically say, is that how you want to enter it? And yes, you have to do that double check of being like, okay, yeah, this all matches. Yeah. Or it'll prompt you a question to be like, is that supposed to be an each, or is that a lump sum? Whatever the case may be. So I think that's where AI is going to become more useful and more impactful, and even more so, like I was saying, for data entry for your post-mortem. If the guys are entering productions, again, if you don't have the full suite of project tracking like built into your estimating software, like what we use are daily work records, right? Like the guys need to get paid somehow, so that gets the payroll, and the foreman on site is entering his information, and usually he'll have a production rate in there that would be valuable for me. But for me to go dig through freaking 3 months of DWR, so that's where I think AI might be able to come in and like kind of sift through that data, you know? So you're scanning all your DWRs and you're saying, okay, out of the 30 days of DWRs that I have here, what's my average production on this item or whatever, right? So I think that's where AI is going to help out. It's going to be basically getting the data back and sifting through all that stuff instead of having, like I said, 10 people there just plugging data or like, running through asphalt tickets to be like, oh, what are the tonnages that we had on the job? Like AI will be able to help with that kind of thing.
I think it's all about like having AI that's going to learn from your execution and being able to bring you data so that you can base yourself on this past experience.
Exactly.
Compound that with your supers, never alleviate or eliminate the communication. I think that's something we're going to need to work on. But what's your take, Guillaume, on the 5, or not 5, but what are the best practices that we need to maintain, and what would you like to see for the estimators in these upcoming years?
I don't think there's a perfect or specific answer to that. Again, obviously AI is going to play a huge part, and we're already looking at ways to use AI to kind of streamline our processes. But the one big thing, and you've already mentioned it, is you're always going to need that human aspect. First of all, for talking to customers or dealing with clients, right? There's always that personal relationship. Like we get contracts sometimes where I'm not the lowest price, but I did the effort at tender time. I spoke to the owner. We did all the legwork where they're like, yeah, maybe you're a little bit more expensive, but we have confidence that you've gone through your stuff and you know what you're talking about. So yeah, we're just going to go ahead and go with you. So I think that human aspect is always going to be there. And again, you're always going to have to double check what AI is doing. So for example, like we're using it just like we do. The company I work at right now, we do trenchless. So a lot of times, like we'll install steel casings under roadways for conduits, for example. So electrical companies will be like, okay, I need to put 20 conduits of 4-inch under the highway. Put me a casing big enough, and I'll have casing spacers in there or whatever. But I need a steel casing big enough to encompass all these conduits. So I was like, because it becomes a tricky calculation, and typically we'll do it in CAD, and we draw and then basically determine what size of casing we're going to need. I'm like, I wonder if AI could figure that out for me quickly instead of me having to spend a half hour in AutoCAD kind of sketching a cross section, right? So I gave the parameters to AI, and I was like, okay, like give me what size of casing. And then I had done the exercise myself on the side, and I knew
shadowing again.
Exactly.
Right?
And AI kept spitting the wrong answer, like giving me casing sizes way smaller than what I actually needed. And I'm like, hey, like it's either I'm giving it the wrong data or like there's a disconnect there. So I'm like, I asked AI, I'm like, hey, draw me a cross section of what like of your calculation of how you get to that. And then basically, whatever your process is, gives me the sketch, but then realizing that like it wasn't the right amount of conduits, and I don't know where the disconnect was. I'm not an AI professional by any means, but then I was just like, okay, so for that, like, AI doesn't cut it. So we need to double check. And that's where I kind of raised the flag internally at the office. I was like, guys, because more and more estimators were saying, oh, I've used AI for this, or I use AI to help me do that. I was like, hey guys, like make sure you double check everything AI is doing until you're confident that it can perform that task for you without having to double check it, kind of thing. And I think there was quite a few things that estimators were using it for that like they realized once they did the hand calculation on the side, like there's something happening in AI there that's not quite like as clean as what we thought it was, kind of thing. So I guess yes, use AI. It's going to be part of the industry. There's nothing we can do about that. And it's coming, but always kind of, double check and always have that, a little bit of doubt in your head of what it's giving you, and always double checking until, like I said, you're confident that you've had it do it for you 20 times, it's spitting out the right answer. Then you're like, okay, I can use it for that task. But don't always assume that it's doing everything for you and it's doing everything properly. And yeah, other than that, it's always about bettering yourself. And again, I think the big thing out there, especially for people that want to become estimators, I think the big concern there is like, well, I've never operated an excavator. I don't know how fast it can work, or I don't know how much pipe you're going to be able to put in the ground. Well, that stuff's not coming from you. Like there's people out there in the industry or at your company that have that knowledge.
So don't worry.
All you're there to do is to pick that knowledge out and talk to different people and then come up with the best solution for the company. And not only that, is typically then you'll have a bid review with managers or whatever. So multiple sets of eyes, because I think there's a big, people are worried about the risk of becoming an estimator and what it means, you're picking up work for all these people that have kids at home and whatever, right? So it's like the risk that comes with it. So I guess I'd like to kind of take that out of there, because it's really just grabbing the information. And when you're surrounded by a good group and when you work for a good company, all that stuff takes care of itself.
Guillaume, you've given us so much advice. I mean, we talked about the evolution of the estimator. We've talked about implementing a successful system for estimation and best practices, advice, and now your take on AI. I'm super grateful that you were able to share this knowledge with our audience. Remember, please share this podcast with your network to propel our mission to give back to the construction industry. Guillaume, I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. I really enjoyed it.